üçüncüden saymadığımızı dördüncü sayıyoruz.
Sayıyoruz yani.
Neyse, böyle bir şey sayılıyor mu?
Türkçe'de böyle bir şey yok da. Mesela diyelim ki ben bu dersi alan TD 261 kodluyu seçen öğrenci grubu var. Bir de 210 kodunu seçenler var. Tamam mı? Ben TD 261'in sorumlu hocası olarak o öğrencilerden onlar diye söz ediyorsam İDE kodlu dersi seçenlere dördüncü şahıs olarak söz edebilirim. Anladınız mı? Böyle bir örnek. Yani belki hoş bir örnek değil ama
Ötekileştirelim.
daha da uzaklaştırıyorum yani. Anladınız mı?
We're explaining the difference between the root and base.
No, fourth person.
Oh, the fourth person. Okay, can we, before we move on, there was a question about root and base, and I tried to explain it, and maybe like we all can look at the Turkish material and try to make the difference here. I don't know your names. Birce and Ayça. Okay, Birce and Ayça already heard this, but I'll repeat it. So, Verbix is an online database for verb conjugation. And I used to use it a lot when I was writing my dissertation. Now a lot less, but it's still, I mean, that guy started it like he had several hundred languages when he put up the conjugations. Now he has like several thousand. I don't think, I mean, he really busy conjugating verbs, but it's well done, it's very useful. It has an online version that has some very limited set of languages, but Turkish is one of them, which is lucky. And then if you're interested, you can download a version on your computer and you'll get a lot more languages. So for morphology, and if you're interested in verbs, it's awesome. If you're not, then it's less so. But if we go to, I mean, gelmek has been one of the few Turkish verbs that I know and I've used like over and over again. So we'll go to gelmek, right? Gelmek. And we have the root. Can you see, or shall I increase it? That's too big. But maybe this is all we need. Okay. So yell, and then jar is progressive, and then first person singular present, right? So we have the, and then we have the E. Okay? So in order for jar to combine with yell, it needs the E. So that's your base.
What's our base? Gel or geli?
Geli.
No, it is generally referred as a part of the suffix.
A part of the suffix. So the suffix. Well then, it's then your base is also. I was looking like for something. Can you give me a verb where the base changes with regard to the root?
For instance, söyle. To talk. Söylüyor. Not söylüyor.
Okay, so there you go. The base is the material that takes whatever inflection comes later on. Okay. You cannot, for some words, the root and the base will be identical. For others, you can't just stick your inflectional material onto the root directly. You need something else. Or in a derivation, your derived word will take on further inflection. Are we okay? We understand that? Okay. So, we will go through this. We did. That's Swedish. Yes. Yeah, I'm so messed up. I can't write in one language. Now I've given you a sense of what segmental morphology is about. Like you chunk string morphemes together. I mean, material that consists of sounds that are further segmental. Okay, but things that are not segmentable into sounds do also play a huge role in morphological structure, and their length or tone. So Aymara is a language isolate from Peru. So in Aymara, you have like your base and you add something to it to get a resultative sense. He has gone. But to get a future meaning, you lengthen the second vowel of the base. And that's a regular way to inflect for future in Aymara. In Lengua Chimantec, which is an Ottomanian language of Mexico, the way to indicate object and to indicate progressive meaning, is by change of tone. So there is another annotation for tone. High, H is for high, and LM is for low middle. Okay. So you go from high tone, which indicates completive or past, to low middle tone to indicate the progressive. Sure.
Şimdi mesela Türkçe'de de bazen ekler örtüşüyor ses ve yapı olarak birbirine benziyor. Fakat bunları tonlamayla ayırabiliyoruz. Mesela öğretmenim sözcüğünde bunu benim öğretmenim şeklinde algılamak da mümkün. Ben öğretmenim şeklinde algılamak da mümkün. Bunu tonlamayla yapıyoruz. Öğretmenim dediğimizde siz bunu zaten anlıyorsunuz otomatik olarak. Ben öğretmenim. Öğretmenim gibi vurgularsak benim anlamı katıyor. Eğer reti vurgularsak öğretmenim bu durumda çağırıyoruz. Anladınız mı? Yani vokatif dedikleri seslenme bilgiler. Öğretmenim, işte arkadaşım, arkadaşım. Anladın mı?
Okay. So the jargon to describe these things I've not done with, there will be more processes to follow, but well, the segment lengthening and tone levels are very important in morphological structure. I gave you examples where they are used alone. Usually they're also used in combination with a morpheme. But the fact that they're used in combination doesn't make them less important. So the segmental morphology that we're used to is also referred to in linguistic jargon as item and arrangement morphology. And there is also the item and process morphology that I'm going to go into. There is also this confusion in the literature, and people are not always very clear what they talk about when they talk about morphological processes. And this applies to inflection, to derivation, to various kinds of affixations that go on. Some people intend to say, to describe an evolution, that something was stuck into something in on something else in a historical sense. So the diachronic perspective, other people actually intend to describe things as they are now, as we observe them. So a synchronic description. Those two are often mixed, and this you need to be really careful about, both in your own analysis and when you read. It is very important to try to understand what the person is referring to when they say a process. And the term derivation can be used in very confusing ways as well. I have been trying to be consistent and refer to derivation when you actually get new words out of something. Like you add re to work and you get rework, so a word with a different meaning. But there are many morphological works in the literature where you will see derivation applied to inflection. So you say that you derive the present tense of verbs in English in the third person by adding an S. So even the addition of inflectional affixes can sometimes be referred to as derivation. Keep this in mind. So, non-concatenative morphology, apart from the length of segment and tone, can be seen when the whole quality of sounds changes in a stem, what you're probably used to and you're taught about irregular verbs in English. Now in English, most verbs nowadays go and take a suffix to indicate past tense. So the Swedish verbs, but they also take an inflection to indicate present tense. So that's prima facie segmental morphology. You have a stem and you have affixes that go on to it. In Germanic languages, it used to be a very productive pattern, and nowadays is very restricted pattern. So restricted that it's called irregular, is to change the vowel from one kind of quality into another, and that's called ablaut. In Swedish it's much more productive than in English, but this is your prima facie process morphology, because you change the stem vowel from to one tense to indicate another tense. So that's ablaut. So in one and the same language you can have both segmental and non-segmental morphology. And this is the overview of what we've seen so far. Then other processes would be when the addition of an affix changes the end of a stem. So in English you add the plural affix and it changes your stem consonant. Transfixation, and that's very widespread in Semitic languages. In Arabic you will have the consonantal root. You will have one kind of vowels to indicate one tense, and then completely different kind of vowels, and they will go in different places in the consonantal root to indicate the future. So that's a widespread Semitic pattern. Other things that will change your stem are duplication, very widespread in Austronesian languages. It's also very widespread in parts of Africa, and it's just not in Europe. There are many things that are not in Europe that are all over the place in other parts of the world. So in Samoan, you can have full reduplication to indicate iterative aspect. So whole stem is repeated. Reduplication is used in many places in the world to indicate plural in nouns. In Samoan, you can have also partial reduplication to indicate plurality of subject. So Savali, he or she walks, and Savali, they walk. Somewhat more rare, but still existing process again in the Austronesian world is when two segments in a stem are changed positions. So pipa, in pigeon in Rotuma, and he up two pigeons. Okay, so he changed the A and the P. They swap places. Metathesis. And that's not an exception. This is how you do it. This is how
Yani
you do it.
seslerin yeri değişiyor.
You do your, okay? A and P and the stem. A and P and the stem. Then stem changing processes that lead to, in principle, new word forms that gain currency. You can clip a form and just use the shorter one. So, automobile came in Swedish. Whenever automobiles came, nobody says automobile nowadays, everybody says bil. That's the word to use. Facsimile has come into many languages, but the word that's being used is a fax. So, part of the stem goes. Back formations are, I think, productive in English to a certain extent, but I tried to think of examples in other languages and I couldn't. So you derive a verb from an existing noun agent. Babysitter produced from the verb babysit. The word babysit did not exist before the noun babysit. And the same with bartender. Now we have a verb to bartend. Bartending is a kind of a back formation of the word bartender. It's a very interesting device that they have in a bunch of Filipino languages. It's subtraction, and it is a regular pattern to produce vocative forms of words that refer to kin and relatives. So here I've given you the reference forms that mean grandparent, mother, father, younger sibling, and different kinds of siblings, and then the vocative forms. So the vocative forms are consistently produced by clipping out the first syllable. So subtracting the first syllable produces the vocative in all of these. Robert Blust described this in a recent article, and he even said that even like proper names get to be subtracted in the same way. So his name is Robert, and he was consistently referred to as Bert. So the raw goes. In the literature, you will see an example of subtraction in French that is heavily contested because in French what you see that you have feminine forms of adjectives, there are mauvaise, grande, longue, verte, and the masculine forms that go mauvais, grand, long, vert. So the idea is that you use the feminine as a base and you clip the last segment and you get the masculine. Now this is on a superficial glance, okay, fine, but feminine forms are rarely in any language the base for any inflection. For many reasons that I'm not going to go into here, usually the masculine forms are bases. That there are historical reasons why this analysis is wrong. Well, on the synchronic level, it almost looks appealing. On the diachronic level, it's crazy, because it's just not what happened in French, and this is why people contest it. But it's, from a cross-linguistic point of view, the analysis doesn't make sense. From a historical point of view, the analysis doesn't make sense either. On a synchronic, very superficial level, if you don't know anything about French, well, this is what looks like it's happening. So if you encounter this example as an example of subtraction, which it usually is in the literature, you have to know that there are many people who have written against. Then we're going into STEM creation processes, which I always find a lot of fun. So you get new words out of acronyms. Creedence Clearwater Revival is one of my favorite rock bands from the 60s, and nobody says Creedence Clearwater Revival, everybody is talking about CCR. The BBC, I'm not sure that people even know what the acronym stands for, but it is an acronym, and this awareness between acronym being used and taking the function of a word was very vivid during the Katrina, when Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005. So I don't know if you were born, but maybe you don't remember. New Orleans was underwater. It was gone. And the FEMA failed to react, like in a totally miserable way. And what people were talking about in the criticism that was raised against them was, well, when the FEMA people learned what their acronym stands for. So people are talking about FEMA as an ocean, and even the FEMA people didn't know that they actually are supposed to manage emergencies. Blends are very productive. Again, in English you get a word out of mixing two elements of, or several elements of a word. Email is nowadays electronic mail. Again, I'm not sure if people even remember what it was. Brunch, coming from breakfast and lunch, and smoke from smoke and fog, or other famous blends. Say it again?
I mean, this is the most fun part, I guess.
Yeah, this is the fun part when you create words. Yeah. And we get to the less fun part. The zero morphs. We had a zero morph when, we see zero morphs very often for a third person and present. And when I talk to now, I will come back to the zero morph and that lack of marking, but still the meaningful lack of marking when I talk about frequency. But zero morphs are real. In Swedish, for instance, one of the realizations of the plural morpheme is zero. So the word for house is hus, so this is one, and this is several. So there is no change. That's not the only, the booger with Swedish that the plural morpheme can be zero, and it can be a bajillion other things. But for somebody who is learning Swedish, if you have learned like a bunch of suffixes and you're trying to stick them onto the right words, because that distribution is completely lexically conditioned, and then you get words like house and a bunch of others that simply don't change, and you're like, well, that's not fair because I learned all this, and now I have to remember that this one doesn't take anything. But that's your zero morph par excellence. Then conversion is very productive in isolating languages, including English, because English is going into isolation in a major way. It's no problem to turn a noun into a verb and vice versa. So turn as a noun and turn as a verb, they're totally okay. Say as a verb and say as a noun. It really depends. Just like in Mandarin or Thai, or Vietnamese, it depends where you will use them, so that they'll be interpreted as nouns or as verbs. No morphological change. And this goes also with proper nouns. You Google something when you look for it, so the brand name is turned into a verb. And that is, I mean, I give English here because I speak English, but if I spoke Mandarin, I could give you many more examples of Mandarin. This is where it's really active and productive. Now, when you do morphological analysis, you will have problems. And those are problems that I try to summarize here. You will have problems, you spelled morpheme, I'm sorry about that, but figuring out what a morpheme is as opposed to base and stem. And this is relevant for your analysis. How many allomorphs and what conditions your allomorphs? Is it meaningful to postulate a zero morph? Yes, it is if you have like an opposition or marking of that same sense by some other material. But I will show you in a minute that you can have a zero morph even if you don't have like some quasi-paradigmatic marking. Portmanteau-morphs are another problem. Portmanteau-morph refers to better here, that covers the meaning of good and the comparative in one non-segmentable form. Are these meaningful to be analyzed? They're not. Do we describe them in a paradigmatic opposition or not? So all of these are very complex problems when you start to analyze languages in a meaningful way. When you come to language description, these problems become very tangible and very real, because you do want to give your readers and the people whose language you're describing a description that actually corresponds to what reality they live in. As I said, they're zero morphs or empty morph. Zero and empty morphs are not always the same thing. And I'll give you the Swedish example, gatukulturet. This is a, gat is the root for street. U is an old dative suffix that nowadays doesn't mean dative at all because Swedish doesn't have cases. And then kultur means office, and then you have the definite article. So this basically means the office that's on the street, but you have to stick that old dative in here. It doesn't mean a thing, but it has to be there. Cranberry morphs are those. Cranberry in the element here. I'm sorry, I told you, I'm totally mixed up because this is morph in Swedish and not in English. But cran doesn't have a meaning of its own, yet it is still identified as a separate morpheme. So rasp in raspberry is the same thing. You can have a morpheme, and this sort of contradicts the whole definition of morpheme, because you look for a morpheme like some string of sounds that is connected to some kind of meaning. And then you get a string of sounds, and it doesn't mean anything, but it's still there, identifiable as an element that can be separated from the rest of the word. So when I started, I said that I will be trying to convince you that this definition of morphology, that it is part of linguistics, where you learn how to combine morphemes into words, is sort of naive. And what I've gone through is to show you that there are a lot of other things that serve a morphological function. There are also processes that we need to consider. So this is why I think that this definition is really too restricted. what we do when we do morphological analysis is that we look at elements that relate to each other in a word form in a meaningful way. Okay. So we look at elements that carry some kind of sense and how they relate to each other in a word form. But they don't have to be segmental. They don't always have to be arranged. And why we do all this? Well, we do it because we want to see which concepts are expressed by lexical morphemes, what is expressed by more abstract morphemes, how these relate to each other in the forms that we produce and we use. We want to see also what governs the creation of words and what mental processes contribute to creation of words. This is ultimately what morphological analysis is about. But think about it like when you cannot do great discoveries in biology if you don't sit with a microscope. In morphology, you are sort of at a middle level microscopic structure. You're looking at words. Usually nowadays we don't look at words in isolation. This is why we try to design corpora. This is why we try to go to spoken speech as much as we can. But morphology is very much about psychology of speech in a real way. So this is what I wanted to say today. As I said, send me your glossings. Maybe you want to revise them after this lecture, so I can mark them, and if I don't understand the Turkish,